Modern dictators are ruthless, but Roman emperors made cruelty an art form. Executions weren't just public, they were performances. Families tortured for entertainment, bodies burned alive to light imperial gardens. These emperors didn't just rule with an iron fist, they ruled with fire, blood, and pain. For them, sadism was policy. Brace yourself for some of the darkest chapters in Roman history on today's episode of the Infographics Show. Number 8. Septimius Severus ruled Rome from 193 to 211, rising to power in the bloody chaos of the Year of the Five Emperors. Civil war had painted Rome and beyond red, and Severus wasted no time getting down to business, purging enemies. He was nowhere near as sadistic as some emperors you'll meet, but he had a vicious streak. Just ask the Caledonians, the tribal warriors from what is now the Scottish Highlands. Rome had built Hadrian's Wall to keep the Caledonians at bay, but Severus wanted it all. He launched a full campaign to conquer Scotland. It didn't go well. His troops were harried by guerrilla attacks and suffered heavy losses. But by 210, the Caledonians were losing and fearing total annihilation, so they tried to arrange a peace deal. Severus agreed on the condition that they also surrender the central lowlands. The pact was a success, but the Scots felt shortchanged and peace didn't last. The tribes revolted, and that's when Severus played his nasty card. He issued an order of complete extermination. No one was to be spared. His son Caracalla, already known for helping Dad eliminate disloyal senators, carried out the Scorched Earth campaign, massacring civilians and torturing villages. But the Caledonians hung on. A year later, Severus died of illness. Rome gave up on conquering Scotland and retreated behind Hadrian's Wall, where they'd been scrapping with the tough tribal people from today's Yorkshire and Northumbria. Severus had been a man who understood the importance of what today's gangsters call sending a message. After defeating his Roman rival Clodius Albinus at the Battle of Lugdunum, he beheaded the corpse, rode over it with his horse, and sent the head back to Rome. Then for good measure, he killed Albinus's wife and children and executed 29 senators. He wasn't the worst emperor by far, and he ruled in times of disharmony and devilish plots. But as one British historian put it, Severus had periods of extreme ruthlessness. And then came his son, who made Daddy look like a cuddly toy. Number 7. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known as Caracalla, is remembered as one of Rome's most cruel, sadistic tyrants. After helping his father exterminate the Caledonians, it's no surprise he developed a twisted sense of morality. But Caracalla didn't just inherit violence, he embraced it, burying his enemies in their own blood. His reign began with fratricide. He and his brother Geta were meant to co-rule, but they despised each other so deeply they couldn't even meet without armed guards. Their mother, Julia Domna, immensely powerful, couldn't keep them from open hatred. Eventually, Caracalla lured Geta to a staged peace meeting, and he had his centurions murder him on the spot. Geta is said to have died in Julia's arms. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Caracalla threatened his mother's life if she dared mourn, standard practice for a tyrant. Caracalla then ordered a damnatio memoriae, erasing Geta from the official records. He lied to the Senate, claiming Geta had tried to kill him, and fled the scene screaming that he had narrowly escaped with his life. Then came the purges. Caracalla had 20,000 people killed, men, women, children, even close friends, anyone suspected of supporting Geta. Bodies were tortured, dragged through the streets by hooks, and left to rot as warnings. According to Herodianus, he didn't even spare athletes, charioteers, singers, or dancers. Dio said he mutilated Rome by depriving it of its good men. Caracalla is described as insecure, envious, and cruel, a spoiled maniac with too much power. He once killed 100 boars in a single day with a dagger, simply for fun. When he learned that Alexandrian playwrights had mocked him, portraying the murder of Geta not as self-defense but ambition, Caracalla marched his army to the city and unleashed mass slaughter. He murdered prominent citizens who came to greet him and then told his soldiers to do as they pleased: loot, take women, and kill at will. It became one of the most senseless massacres in Roman imperial history. His cruelty extended to the crowds in the arena. When fans booed the wrong chariot team, he had his guards slaughter every one of them. He then allowed the guards to rob or ransom survivors. Caracalla was a vain coward, obsessed with his image as a great military leader, though he was anything but. Even his own soldiers couldn't take it anymore. In 217 AD, during a routine roadside stop to relieve himself, one soldier seized the moment and stabbed the emperor. Caracalla staggered, wounded but alive, until 2 Praetorian tribunes rushed in pretending to help, and instead they finished the job. At just 29 years old, the blood-soaked reign of Caracalla was over. Okay, so it's gonna be hard to beat that. Actually, no, it isn't. Number 6. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known as Elagabalus, took the throne before his brain had finished developing, and history rarely goes well when a teenage boy is handed imperial power. Wisdom takes time, and Elagabalus never got the chance to gain any. He was dead before he turned 19. He came to power after the short, chaotic reign of Macrinus, an emperor who didn't even last a year before being assassinated. The mastermind behind that assassination was Julia Maesa, Elagabalus's grandmother. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out quite a lot. After his death, his memory was condemned, damnatio memoriae, statues destroyed, coins melted, records erased. But the stories that survived paint a wild, chaotic picture. He married a Vestal virgin, a sacrilege in Rome, and then he built a temple to himself, infuriating the elites. After divorcing the Vestal, he turned his affections to the Praetorian Guard and dressing as a woman. One of his favorite guards was the handsome charioteer named Hierocles, whom Elagabalus married. What people did behind closed doors in Rome wasn't the issue. He was the emperor, and he flaunted his wild ways publicly. He walked the streets dressed as a prostitute, offering himself to strangers. If you were summoned to his bedchamber, refusal wasn't an option. Cassius Dio claimed Elagabalus was obsessed with penises but hated his own, once asking a surgeon if he could fashion a vagina in its place. Elagabalus delighted in causing outrage. His parties were twisted theater. Guests were smothered under cascades of violets and other flowers. He would unleash big cats into banquet halls and laugh as the nobles screamed. He'd already had the animals' teeth pulled out. Some sources claimed he kept exotic animals and fed them human parts taken from the men that he had castrated and murdered. One ancient text alleged that he preferred handsome noble boys from across Italy, and that he would only choose victims with both parents. Why? Well, the text says the sorrow should be all the greater. So he didn't just kill, he focused on causing the greatest amount of grief. Yet this cross-dressing, penis-chopping boy emperor also had a clownish side. At banquets, he would slip whoopee cushions onto senators' chairs. Still, jokes aside, he executed senators who disapproved of his antics, calling them traitors. A British historian later called him a crack-brained despot. He wasn't far off. Elagabalus was an embarrassment to Rome, a bizarre mix of decadence, cruelty, and juvenile humor. Eventually, the Praetorian Guard had had enough. He and his mother were murdered, beheaded, and dragged through the streets by the soldiers who had finally lost patience. His reign remains a surreal footnote in Roman history, a horny teen with a god complex, a knife-happy court, and far too much power. Sure, maybe he wasn't as bad as some, but this next guy, he was demonic. Number 5. As you probably know, Julius Caesar was murdered by a pack of backstabbers, and later his adopted son Octavian, better known as Augustus, rose to power. With him, the chaos of the late Republic ended, and Rome entered a golden era of peace called the Pax Romana. Life was pretty good under Augustus, who, unlike most emperors to come, died peacefully in old age. And then his stepson Tiberius took the reins, and that's when the real trouble began. Tiberius was paranoid, maybe justifiably, and like many rulers before and after, he began with purges. One of the most famous was against Sejanus, the ambitious prefect of the Praetorian Guard, who grew so powerful rumors swirled that he saw himself as the true emperor. Tiberius had him killed. But he didn't stop there. He ordered the systematic execution of anyone remotely associated with Sejanus, and he kept on going. People were strangled, starved, or hurled down the Gemonian stairs. He decimated the Senate and then went after their families. No one was safe. The death toll remains debated, but it was enough to cement his place among Rome's darkest rulers. It wasn't just the executions. Tiberius was also a notorious drunk who was violent, vindictive, and depraved. He allegedly built a villa for orgies, forcing men and women to indulge his every whim. Ancient accounts say that he became especially cruel to people if they rejected his advances, having some thrown off of cliffs on Capri. If the sea was out, his men would beat them with oars until they died. Tiberius saw conspiracies everywhere, and in his madness he ordered entire families killed. He had people dragged behind horses, forced to drink wine until their bladders ruptured, and mutilated them for amusement. His sadism reached such heights that a soothsayer named Thrasilus told him that he would live a very long life just to calm him down. Even the Romans, used to cruelty, were horrified. Graffiti appeared mocking his lunacy. When he finally died at 78 in his villa, Rome celebrated. Those he'd imprisoned on absurd treason charges rejoiced. The historian Suetonius wrote that some prayed that he find no rest in his death, but dwell among the damned. Others threatened to drag his corpse to the river Tiber, where the bodies of criminals were thrown. Tiberius didn't die with honor or affection. but compared to this next man, he might as well have been a saint. Number 4. One historian described Commodus as base and dishonorable, cruel and lewd, defiled of mouth and debauched. That is one hell of an epitaph. His violence started young. Commodus desperately craved respect, but he never earned it. He loved performing in gladiatorial shows, fighting staged battles where opponents were clearly ordered to lose. For bloodthirsty crowds, he would slaughter animals, shooting lions, spearing elephants, or beheading ostriches, always from a safe distance. Historian Cassius Dio recounts a disturbing spectacle. Commodus had disabled men, those with missing feet, tied up in the arena to act as giants. He then dressed them in fake serpent costumes and beat them to death with clubs while they helplessly tossed sponges in place of stones. He'd killed them with blows of a club, Dio wrote, after fastening about their knees some likeness of serpents' bodies. It was grotesque, and it earned him no respect, only disgust. That only made him more enraged. His life was dedicated to pleasure and power. He had ex-consuls Salvius Julianus and Tarutenius Paternus executed on mere suspicion. He renamed himself with grand titles, equating himself to the gods. Historians described him as megalomaniacal and increasingly insane. He ordered the execution of his own sister Lucilla and then killed his wife on the claim that she had been unfaithful, while he was sleeping with as many men and women as he could find. He fancied himself the next Hercules, but instead of battling monsters, he stood on balconies and threw spears at bears, safe from danger. He claimed to have won over 12,000 contests in the arena. Cassius Dio scoffed. Most of them were mock fights with wooden sticks, more like toddlers' games than battles. So no, maybe he wasn't the most sadistic on this list, but he was a spoiled, violent brat, a narcissist with a god complex and no self-awareness. And like many who acted like gods in front of Romans' elites, he paid the price. In 192 AD, conspirators tried to poison him. When that failed, they just sent in a wrestler named Narcissus, who strangled him to death. Commodus died at just 31 years old. And now things get even worse. Number 3. In Suetonius' Life of Domitian, Domitian doesn't at first come across as noticeably tyrannical, but halfway down the text, things start to get dark. When he was attempting reform related to public morals, he went slightly crazy and arrested men whom he said had been sleeping with Vestal virgins. He had the men beaten to death with rods and the women buried alive. Domitian speed ran the shift from halfway decent ruler to full-blown sadist. He ordered the execution of a young student of the actor Paris simply because the boy's looks and talent didn't measure up to his teacher. And then there was the time he had a spectator dragged from the arena and torn apart by wild dogs, just for criticizing the gladiator. It's noted that he seemed to take great pleasure in such violence. One of the most chilling examples involved the astrologer Ascletarian. Brought before the emperor, Domitian asked him a grim question: "How will you die?" Ascletarian calmly replied that his death would involve dogs. Wanting to disprove the prophecy, Domitian had him executed immediately and ordered the body burned. But fate wasn't finished. As the astrologer's corpse lay on the pyre, a sudden gust of wind blew it off of the flames. Domitian was later informed that local dogs started savaging the half-burned body of Ascletarian. But for the Roman writers, the worst of the worst didn't kill the plebes, they killed the nobles, and Domitian had many politicians murdered after he'd accused them of plotting a revolt. It turned out some of them had, and Domitian had them tortured. He often used deception. Friends were invited for wine and conversation only to be arrested and executed days later. He unleashed ancient and brutal punishments, including crucifixion and slow death by mutilation, even on longtime allies. No one was safe. He murdered his cousin Flavius Clemens, supposedly for holding Jewish sympathies, though some believe that the real reason was that Domitian had an eye on Clemens' wife. Dozens were executed alongside Flavius. Others were stripped of their wealth and titles for vague charges like sacrilege or godlessness. Domitian himself wasn't exactly pious. He was known to swim with prostitutes and had a fetish for plucking out their body hair. Okay, so that is hardly a major sin, but these behaviors fueled rumors that he was also a persecutor of Christians, boiling victims alive in vats. Between 93 and 96 AD, Rome endured what historians call a reign of terror. Domitian twice banished philosophers and executed 12 former consuls, the elite of Rome's ruling class. His assassination on September 18, 96 was orchestrated by court officials and carried out by his chamberlain, Parthenius. After his death, Domitian was given the full damnatio memoriae treatment. His statues were smashed and his name erased. Now on to the true monsters of the empire, the big leagues. Number 2. There's perhaps no name in Roman history more associated with madness and cruelty than Caligula. After all, he killed family members and declared himself a god. Born in 12 AD as Gaius Julius Caesar, he spent his early years trailing his father, the military hero Germanicus, on campaigns. Soldiers adored the child in his tiny boots, nicknaming him Caligula or Little Boot. And then things turned dark. Germanicus died in Syria under mysterious circumstances, though his wife, the powerful Agrippina the Elder, believed that he had been poisoned. Germanicus wasn't just Caligula's father, he was Claudius's brother and Nero's grandfather. It was a killer dynasty. Agrippina blamed Tiberius, and whether or not he was behind it, he certainly oversaw the exile and deaths of Caligula's two older brothers, and eventually Agrippina herself. Surviving the bloody purges, Caligula eventually became emperor, and to be fair to him, he was a very popular young man. He reformed taxes, ended treason trials, granted amnesty, and put on crowd-pleasing gladiator games, including his famed panther baiting shows. He launched major public works projects and for a while was admired by all. And then, something changed. Caligula fell seriously ill through unknown causes and flitted between life and death for a month. Whatever it was, when he recovered, he was not the same man. He brought back treason trials and executed senators, including Tiberius Gemellus, the innocent grandson of Tiberius, just to remove a potential rival. Then came the orgies, the cross-dressing, and the bizarre power games. He would boast to his lovers, "I have the right to do anything to anybody." Or, "Off comes this beautiful head whenever I give the word." He often spared his lovers, but not the masses. When there weren't enough criminals to feed the lions, he just threw members of the audience into the arena instead, after first having their tongues cut out to stop them from screaming. According to Dio, no wealthy Roman was safe. Caligula needed cash for his extravagance, so he accused the rich of imaginary crimes, executed them, and seized their assets. His soldiers despised him. After humiliating military campaigns in Gaul and Britain, they endured his mockery, including crude gestures when they kissed his hand. Suetonius claimed a soldier who plotted to kill him was caught and executed. Caligula had also enjoyed watching nobles squirm in the arena, sometimes forcing old gray-haired men to fight. Seneca said he gambled away fortunes and then murdered nobles to refill the treasury. He once claimed if the Senate didn't treat him like a god, he would move to Egypt, where people knew how to worship properly. He spent the equivalent of $5 billion in a single year, but despite the chaos, many ordinary Romans still liked him. So when he was stabbed 30 times by his guards after just 4 years in power, some mourned. Were the wildest stories all true? Probably not all. He likely never made his horse a consul, but some atrocities are hard to dispute. Like the pleb Publius Alfrenius Potatus, who swore that he would sacrifice himself if Caligula survived an illness, only for Caligula to drag him through the streets and throw him from a gate, or the boy executed for coughing, or the beautiful youth murdered out of envy whose father was forced to attend a dinner with a man who had just killed his son. According to Seneca, the father had to smile or risk losing his other sons. And now, we move into truly uncharted depths of depravity. Number 1. Seneca the Younger fell out of favor with Emperor Claudius and was exiled. He was recalled later as a tutor to a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, better known as Nero. In time, Nero would accuse Seneca of being part of the plot against him, forcing the great Stoic to die at his own hands. Apparently, Seneca, in line with his philosophy, took it all on the chin. Remember Agrippina the Elder, Caligula's mother? Well, Agrippina the Younger was her daughter and Nero's mother. Like many Roman elites, she was toxic, ruthless, ambitious, and politically lethal. The real power behind the throne. Some historians believe that she even poisoned her husband, Emperor Claudius, to clear the path for her son. At first, Nero's reign seemed promising. He was young, artistic, and clever, thanks in part to Seneca's guidance. He loved poetry and music, and he thought himself a great patron of the arts. But things soured when Agrippina grew too overbearing, especially when she started cozying up to Britannicus, Claudius's biological son, who, unlike Nero, had a legitimate claim to the throne. That did not end well. Britannicus mysteriously dropped dead at a dinner party. Agrippina was furious and began scheming for more power. Nero, increasingly suspicious, considered poisoning or stabbing her before settling on a sabotaged boat designed to sink. But she survived. Eventually, Nero went for something a bit more traditional. He sent his naval commander Anicetus to her house with a message. Her guard down, she was clubbed to death. Nero staged it as an accident. Let's not forget that this was his own mother. and in Rome, matricide was a serious taboo, punishable by poena culae, or being sewn into a sack with wild animals and tossed into the Tiber. Nero had just crossed a major line, and he was just getting started. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which raged for 6 days before being brought under control, but the fire reignited and then burned for 3 more days, destroying 3 districts. Nero blamed the Christians, who he despised, though some suspected he had started it himself. It's alleged that Nero sat back smiling, playing his lyre as thousands were made homeless and hundreds died. This might not be true, but the fire was very real. According to Tacitus, Nero used Christians as scapegoats. He threw them to wild animals, crucified some upside down, or set them on fire to light up the night. They were apparently nailed to the cross, doused in oil, and set ablaze like street lamps. And then came his troubled personal life. He accused his first wife, Octavia, of infertility and adultery. He exiled her and had her beheaded, and then sent her head to the man that he claimed that she had cheated with. Tacitus described her as being slashed with knives and thrown into a room full of hot steam. Nero then married Poppaea Sabina, formerly married to his advisor, Sextus Alfrenius Burrus, whom Nero may have murdered. Poppaea is also said to have encouraged Nero to kill Octavia. Nero may have loved Poppaea. Still, Suetonius claimed an enraged Nero kicked her in the stomach, killing her. Some say that she died of complications of pregnancy. Either way, she was dead, and Nero never recovered or pretended to never recover. In 66 AD, Nero fell for Statilia Messalina, already married to a powerful consul. Such a small inconvenience didn't stop Nero. He destroyed the husband and made sure that he was soon dead. As for Messalina, she was one of very few of Nero's lovers that was still alive after he died. After that, in 67 AD, he castrated a freed man named Sporus, dressed him in women's clothing, and paraded him as Poppaea reborn. Okay, so Nero had murdered his mother, both wives, multiple advisors, and turned Rome into a theater of blood. But there was more. When a slave killed Senator Lucius Pedanius Secundus, Nero didn't just execute the culprit, he had 400 of the man's fellow slaves put to death, and people cheered in the streets. Meanwhile, he threw lavish parties, beheaded harlots from all over Rome, and made himself the star of every spectacle he put on. He understood the masses. They all wanted bread and circuses and blood. He was adored by many ordinary Romans. After all, he brought back the games after a decades-long hiatus following the deadly stadium riot. He gained more widespread applause after he helped Pompeii recover after its run-in with an angry Mount Vesuvius. But he ruled through fear. As paranoia consumed him, Nero created a vast spy network and purged anyone who looked at him sideways. Eventually, Rome's ruling class had had enough, and for sure, this champion of bloodthirsty tyrants would be subjected to damnatio memoriae. Nero was abandoned by the Senate and betrayed by his own Praetorian Guard. Branded a traitor and sentenced to be beaten to death, he fled with a few loyal servants. When he learned his enemies were closing in and there was no escape, he asked his secretary Epaphroditus to help him die. Together, they performed the grisly deed of stabbing Nero many times. And while emperors dished out cruelty from the top, life wasn't so much better at the bottom. Watch The Horrible Life of an Average Roman Empire Slave to see how brutal it was, or click on this video instead.